Australia's Labor Prime Minister, John Curtin.
I'm happy to be back in Australia. I've seen many things and many places. And although every man can be forgiven for loving his own country best, I believe it is an impartial assessment of the facts to say that I have not seen any country or any people better than my own.
Welcome to Curtin's Cast, the John Curtin Research Centre's podcast, brought to you by myself, Nick Dyrenforth, and Redbridge's Cos Samaras. Each fortnight we bring you the freshest and most challenging conversations with leaders, activists and thinkers from the world of Australian and global politics, culture and ideas. Good morning, Curtinistas. I feel like Robin Williams from, what was that movie called? I forgot.
Good morning, Vietnam.
Good morning, Vietnam. Good morning, Curtinistas. It's a wonderful Tuesday morning in Melbourne town, and we've got a wonderful guest, Emma Dawson, who I'll introduce in a moment. If you've been living under a rock, my name's Nick Dyrenforth, Executive Director of the JCRC, co-host of the wonderful Curtin's Cast, along with my great mate, Kung Fu Cos Samaras. Good morning, Cosmos. How are you?
Good, thanks. Speaking of Kung Fu, I did an interview with Four Corners last night. They did a nice little piece on the UFC.
Yes, particular angle. You're just a media superstar these days. 400 media interviews in during the election. Can't keep up with you.
Yeah, well, the angle on Four Corners was not all that complimentary of the UFC. I was there to offer up a counter view.
Yep, there are some interesting characters, and we've got an interesting character today in the studio with us. Emma Dawson, she's a great mate of mine, and she has recently been appointed Executive Director of the Chifley Research Centre, which is the ALP's official think tank. And she was formerly Executive Director of Per Capita, a progressive think tank based here in Melbourne, one of the first think tanks, progressive think tanks in the Australian think tank ecosystem. What a terrible phrase that is.
It is.
Emma has worked as a researcher at Monash University and Melbourne University in policy and public affairs for SBS and Telstra, and a senior policy advisor in the Rudd and Gillard Governments for another friend of the JCRC and Advisory Council member, the Honourable Stephen Conroy. Emma is also a media superstar. She's published serious reports, articles, opinion pieces, appeared on TV, radio, as an expert witness in parliamentary inquiries. We could go on and on and on. I believe she's writing a new book, but she was also co-editor with Professor Janet McKelman of a collection of essays called What Happens Next? Reconstructing Australia After COVID-19, which was published by MUP. She's also a fellow of the Women's Leadership Institute of Australia and adjunct professor at UTS Business School. I didn't know that, Emma. I know a lot about you because our daughters formerly went to the same primary school.
That's right.
The think tank primary school, we call it. Emma Dawson, welcome to Curtin's Cast. How are you?
Great to be with you. I've finally made it onto Curtin's Cast. I feel very honoured.
You've made it in life.
I know.
You've made it in life. And you've come a long way, because I believe you were born in the global epicentre, the home of cooperatives, that is Rochdale.
That's
in
right.
England.
Yeah.
Tell us about being born in Rochdale.
Born in Rochdale in Lancashire, which is, was a mill town in the north of England. Several generations of my family worked in those mills. My grandmothers and grandfathers all started working those mills at 10 years old. My parents did the same. Well, not at 12. They got their O-levels and then went to work. And then in the post-war years, with a lot of the social democratic reforms that were put in place, they were able to go to grammar school. They weren't able to afford a university education, but they got trades training at night when they were in their early 20s, which is where they met, at tech school. And so my dad moved off the mill floor into management, and Mum moved into the tech side of the industry. And when I was 2, in the early 70s, Dad was headhunted to come and work in an Australian cotton mill as a manager here in Gippsland, and we moved to Australia in 1974. So I've been here all my life, but I do go back home regularly and stay pretty abreast of politics over there.
Home, you still call it home.
Still call it home.
Still call it home.
If you heard me talking to my dad, I'd have a very clear Northern English accent. Yes, I would.
Jeffrey boycott style.
It is a little
Jeffrey
bit.
boycott style. I guess you would keep a close eye on political developments in the UK.
Yep.
Cos and I have spoken a lot about what's going on in the UK with some of the, the troubles that Keir Starmer. I want to talk about Australian Labor at depth in today.
Yep.
You keep a close eye on what's happening in a lot of those sort of working class communities and the fragmentation of the vote. Reform is surging at the moment.
Yep.
At least according to the polls, they don't have a lot of MPs.
No. But they did pick up a Cheshire, seat in Cheshire in the local council elections recently. Nigel Farage, I refuse to call him Nigel Farage. He's going to be patriotic. You should pronounce it in an English manner, not a French manner. So it's Nigel Farage for me. It's a worry. And I think, going back, we went back in 2018. I go back every couple of years if I can, and sort of seeing the North in particular, those working class communities that were so destroyed really in the Thatcher years, swing away from Labor in 2019, early 2020s, come back obviously at the recent election, most of them, but that dislocation and the economic collapse of those communities is still being felt 30, 40
Cultural
years later.
collapse.
Cultural collapse, that's right.
Yeah,
So
collapse of social capital.
Completely. And people voting for Brexit because they think it's something. It's just do something that's going to change.
Yeah,
the
big
fortunes.
FU, big FU to
exactly.
the establishment. They
Like
see
Trump.
Labor as part of the establishment.
Yeah.
It's something we've actually touched on before, and that is the difference between the UK and this country during the 80s was Hawke and Keating. I was a lefty back growing up in
You're
the
still
90s.
lefty, Cos. Come on.
Still.
No, that's right. Complaining about the economic rationalism, but what they actually were doing was basically, a future-proofing future Australian communities from the excesses of globalisation.
That's right.
That didn't happen in the UK.
No, didn't happen in the
And so
UK or the
they're
US.
completely exposed to everything that's hit them.
Yep.
So you've had not only what happened during the 80s and 90s, the GFCs hit them again.
Yep.
Right, in a very big way, and then everything that's come since then.
And then, then they had an austerity
That's right.
conservative government after the GFC, whereas we had a Labor government that invested and ensured we didn't enter a recession. The cycles have always been a little bit out of whack, and Australia has benefited, I think, because we had in the 80s a government that was sure the world was a neoliberal world. Everything was deregulated, globalisation was happening, free trade, and those things were unavoidable. This idea that Australia could have not been part of that is nonsense. But the fact that we had, like what Wayne Swan calls Australian labourist approach to those reforms, that meant we created Medicare, universal superannuation, there were wage trade-offs, we didn't leave people, we didn't throw people on the scrap heap the way they did in parts of the north of England and the south of America. And so our cycle is a little different, and we're not quite as, people aren't quite as despairing of the democratic project here as comparable working class communities are in those countries now because of that history. Yeah.
It's something that conservative forces in this country completely misread.
Yep.
Take lessons out of the UK and the US based on what we are seeing, and they forget that, no, you're dealing with vastly different countries here.
Yep.
Besides the economic situation you've just articulated, if you go to the US and you compare us to the US, we're vastly different when it comes to culture.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're far less religious. There's a whole range of things mixing in there.
Far less individualist, right? Far less libertarian. Much, and you saw that in the response to COVID. And a lot of those commentators that think the US is the gold standard were like, why are people so acquiescent in Melbourne? Well, we're not acquiescent. We just care about other people. Like, we still believe to some extent in the power of the collective good, right? And we've got now a good, strong Labor majority government that hopefully can capitalise on that, because we're not as far down the track of that disenfranchisement as
We
as
do.
the
We do.
US.
We have a Labor government, and Emma, any moment now, Anthony Albanese is about to stand up at the National Press Club,
Yep.
giving his first major address since the May 3rd triumph, the greatest triumph since John Curtin in 1943. I was pressing you as to whether you had an advanced copy of Elbow's speech, but some of the themes have been reported in the press this morning. He's talking about one of the key aims of his government is meeting its election promises before we get too far ahead of ourselves. Let's meet our commitments. And one of the things, there's a couple of things which leapt out at me. One was, there is a big trust deficit at the moment. There's a lack of faith in institutions, in democracy, in government being able to, deliver, fulfill its promises. And this is something that I've written about for a long time. I know you've written about. This is a big problem for centre-left, social democratic, Labor politics, because we are in the business of having interventionist, active, good government. And if people don't trust government, that's a big problem for our side of politics. So Albo's talking about that. And I want to dig into, there's another theme of progressive patriotism, which comes back to your early work for per capita. So per capita, people like Tim Soutphommasane.
That's right.
I said likes of Mark Kenny, no offence to Mark, running around now as if he invented progressive patriotism. It was actually Tim who, and before Tim, the old left of the 1940s, 50s and 60s, they didn't call it progressive patriotism, but they were big on this as well. Albo's up at the press club. Can you give us a sense of where you think he's heading with this agenda for the second term?
I think it ties back to what we were just talking about, right? He's saying, as you just pointed out, Nick, social democratic, centre-left, Labourist, progressive, whatever you want to call them, governments, and particularly social democratic, centre-left, Labor governments are not communists, but they're also not completely, let it rip free marketeers. It's traditionally, as we found after the Second World War, we don't want to slide into fascism or communism. The middle way is a good, solid social democratic state that both designs and then regulates markets in people's interest. The loss of faith in that system, particularly amongst young people and young people on the left, is profoundly corrosive and damaging to democratic trust. You see a lot of this in young people today who've been disappointed, right, by the outcome of the election because they wanted what they thought was going to be a progressive crossbench. And we can touch on whether a lot of the Teals are actually progressive perhaps another time. Because they say, electoralism has failed us. What they really mean by that is I don't accept the outcome of a democratic system because it's not doing what I want it to do. And my beliefs as an individual are more important than the collective. What the Prime Minister's talking about today is getting those people back, is restoring their trust that actually a good government that doesn't just let it rip the way that particularly now the extreme right-wing coalition here doesn't want to regulate anything, doesn't want to tax anyone to spend anything, just thinks that we should, basically it's government by... I don't understand why a lot of them go into the government because they don't seem to believe in government. I can only assume that on the right they can't get a job in the private sector, so they decide to become an MP. But what Albanese is trying to do is
power,
of course, which they would never get if they had to, compete on merit in the private sector. Anyway, what Albanese is trying to do, I think, is say we are going to be a good social democratic government. A lot of you have forgotten or not even seen what that looks like. Because for the 6 years for the government that we worked for, a lot of good stuff was done, but it was overshadowed by the warfare between. Fighting. That's right, and then a lot of those good things were very quickly undone. So
the only lived memory of the voters that I think the Prime Minister is going to be talking about is one of that 6 year that period of 6 years that were full of leadership, challenges and so on. So they have no real lived experience or memory of a really good functioning social democratic political movement.
Yep.
And you could see that that's what they're thinking about in this term. So you've got Chalmers took on a number of vested interest in the super tax policy. We saw the reaction to that, completely blind to May the 3rd's result.
Completely.
Because if that's the fight that Chalmers and Albanese are going to take to the next election, they're going to win a landslide.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Claire O'Neill this morning, basically, again, going into bat for young people with regards to housing and the planning system is built to reward asset owners. And again, picking a fight. So the narrative so far seems to be building towards that
I agree. And I think they've done it cautious. Like there's a lot of, I mean, you'll see the headline in Crikey today, this without having seen the Prime Minister's full speech, they're already, this is a very low agenda. He's not really aiming for much. Actually, if you look at what's been there in the first term, reinvesting in Medicare, making TAFE free, tackling the housing crisis, money for social housing, other amendments to allow more housing, the IR reforms, restoring dignity to work, same job, same pay, lifting the wages of care workers, which is a huge part of our economy, a big, part of working for women. These are reformists. They're not what people seem to want is a grand narrative Malcolm Turnbull style speech, and throwing everything up in the air and starting over. That's not how you build trust. And I think the Prime Minister's alluding in the excerpts you've seen from the speech this morning that loss of trust, some people seek to exploit it. And he's referring to the Greens there, I would say. A lot of that anti-politics that we saw from Bant and Max Chandler-Mather, people don't say, well, it's not populism because it's on the left, and a lot of people describe it as anti-politics. What it is undermining people's belief that this system of democracy, which, let's remind everyone, it's the best, it's the only thing that's ever worked. Churchill's line, it's the worst system other than everything else that's ever been tried. That undermining actually prevents us doing stuff. It prevents us building things. And so it's really building is what Albanese is talking about, not just building the practical things that help people, but then building a vision so that people can see actually this is the role of government. You've been told endlessly for 30, 40 years that government should get out of the way. Government is the problem. And what we've seen, of course, now is that all of that social infrastructure that was put in place after the Second World War, the reason boomers are so well off, because they were given an affordable education, affordable housing, good, secure long-term jobs, has been degraded by 30 years of laissez-faire market economics. And so it's demonstrating we can do this without scaring the horses. Because, as you just said, Cos, even a minor change that the vast majority of Australian people believe in, it's like World War III on the front pages of both national dailies.
The thing Labor now needs to have, and they've got 94 seats to do it, is have the courage to get into the rhetoric.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
So what we missed in the first term was all these things that you just articulated that they did. There was no comms.
No, didn't talk about it.
No rhetoric. Beat up on vested interests publicly. Do it. Because it's those younger Australians who are looking for someone. They're gonna overlook the small changes and incremental bits of policy, but really you'll get their attention if you are picking a fight on behalf of a large group of Australians that feel like to be
43% of the electoral roll, Gen Y plus Gen Z, as we pointed out.
And people who have,
and I don't think that, to be honest, here's a swipe, Emma. I don't think they're reading Crikey, to be honest. Crikey's part of the what I would call the online legacy media. Yeah. And quite frankly, I don't take Crikey seriously. Anyone who publishes Guy Rundle on a regular basis, or previously did, and Bernie and Bernard Keane don't deserve to be taken seriously.
No, there's an elitist sort of very cranky.
That was a cheap shot, but I enjoyed it.
It was a cheap shot, but you had it. There's a group that very whether they're behind the Greens or the Teals or the left of the coalition. Matt Keane's a lot of their hero to a lot of them, that want to see a certain very dry, very supply side, economically rationalist approach to the economy. So they're not in favour of universal services. They're not in favour of redistribution or pre-distribution. They are in favour of action on climate change and integrity and those sort of those things that shouldn't be a left or right issue, right? But economically, they oppose the Labor project. I mean, they oppose the idea of creating a society in which, those at the top have to share a little bit more to lift up those at the bottom. And it is destroying their own political movement, Cos, as you've pointed out many, many times, because if you don't give young people the opportunity to build a life, not only will they become very resentful and anti-authoritarian, they're never going to become conservative because they've got nothing to conserve. They won't own anything. So Menzies got this, right? He put a lot of money into housing for sale because he wanted to create a nation of little capitalists. So But it's also what's good for what the Prime Minister's doing here is saying we've demonstrated a calm, methodical first term, no scandals, no big blow-ups. They are going bolder in this second term. You look at Jim's rhetoric over the last week, particularly on those superannuation changes, and he says 2 newspapers hate it, the rest of the country doesn't. Some rich people don't want to pay more tax.
Exactly.
That's basically what we're talking about. And the entire country will go, yep, just like they did when they changed the stage 3 tax.
Do you know what, Emma? You've just reminded me that last term, and I think it actually was a sort of subterranean force here explaining why Albo was re-elected and so convincingly. This was a scandal-free. It had its problems, the voice referendum, the comms problems that you've just alluded to. Not a single minister was sacked.
Nope.
There wasn't a serious scandal. Compare that to...
It's the first time in any government for 50 years, mind you. Right?
So the obviously the Rudd, the 2010, obviously hallmarked by Julia Gillard replacing Kevin Rudd, but you had some ministerial turnover. I think with Joel Fitzgibbon, a mate of mine. Sorry, Joel, to mention you in this dispatches, but the first term of the Howard government was plagued by ministerial scandals, and John Howard was compelled to introduce a ministerial code of conduct. Compare that to what happened between 2022 and 2025 for all the problems that Labor experienced. It's quite staggering. And it underlined that sense of you may not love Albo and Co, but you could respect they were seen as competent and stable.
And people just doing their job, right? A cabinet full of ministers doing their job, a caucus full of people getting out and talking to the community. And I read this election result very much as a celebration of our electoral system, but the Australian people going, you know what? Can we give them a go, please? Like they got in 3 years ago. They didn't have a big majority, and in that time, on both the left and the right, all we've seen is people trying to stymie a government being a government. And I think now there is an element in this vote of saying, let's give them a chance, okay? Let's get rid of the naysayers on both sides. So both Dutton and Ban are out. Let's see what they can do. And so it is important now that they shift to, as the Prime Minister says, really delivering on a lot of those things, but focusing on the things that matter to people. So while the media, all they were focused on really in that term was, the Voice has been a disaster. It's a disaster for the Prime Minister. I cannot remember reading one article about the rollout of urgent care clinics. No media coverage of these 87 things that are located in suburbs that people care. And when they go to the ballot box, they think, well, the Voice failed, but I was able to get my kids'
people
arm fixed. Didn't give a damn, mate.
No, they give Kevin.
Those urgent care clinics came up in your polling, didn't they?
They did, yes.
People loved it.
Yeah, that's
loved
right.
it.
The thing about what happened in that first term was, yes, there was a lot of angst and frustration expressed by the electorate towards the Albanese government because of a perception that nothing was getting done. We go back to the point. The rhetoric and communication was not great.
Yep.
But what was also upsetting them was 2 leaders on either side agitating angst within our community around particular issues, whether it was the Voice, whether it was the Gaza Israel issue. And basically social cohesion was collapsing as a result of their role as political leaders, and both lost their seats.
That's right.
That's
I
the
agree.
point, right? Yeah. I think the biggest message out of that election result was if you hang around in the fringes too long, this country's going to basically throw you out.
That's right. Yep. We want a sensible, centrist's a dirty word amongst a lot of progressives, but amongst ordinary Australians, it's not. They think, well, I don't want an extremist. I don't want someone that's going to, I don't want Donald Trump and I don't want Jeremy Corbyn. I don't want Bernie Sanders. I don't want Nigel Farage, insisting on saying Farage. And that was reflected in this result. And the Prime Minister reads, I think, the Australian people really well. He's got a treasurer that does that really well, that comes from an outer suburb. Their backgrounds matter. They're actually from quite diverse backgrounds. There are more people of colour and non-English speaking backgrounds in the Labor caucus now than you would find in most meetings of progressive activist organisations, I would dare to say. And so I do think that that Australian voters went, can we give them a go here? Because the thing I've noticed, while I keep seeing in the paper, they've messed up the voice, or they're not strong enough on Gaza, or they're too strong on Gaza, or all of the things that were being driven by the extreme fringes. At the same time, people were going, well, my husband cut himself with a chainsaw last week and I got him stitched up in 50 minutes for free at the new urgent care clinic up the road. Or my kid got a spot in TAFE that's free and now he's going to have a job. Or the contract that my fly-in, fly-out partner was on, suddenly he's earning the same as everyone else because he's not with a labour hire company anymore. These things make a material difference to people's lives. One of the challenges we have is that the media class, the dominant journos in the press gallery now, come from upper middle class inner city backgrounds themselves, and they don't really understand what's driving most people and don't see that actually, this idea that it was Mediscare, no, it was based in fact. Like, people have not been able to get to see a GP for free for a long time because of what was done under the last coalition, the chipping away at it. It's not a lie. It's not just a campaign tactic. Actually investing in health and ensuring people have those essential services is what most people think government's about.
It's understood in deeply cultural and emotional terms. You mentioned Trump there before. Trump was a big disruptor at the election and continues to disrupt the world. And we've now got the Donald and then Elon Musk, these two children who they're children who didn't grow up, and it can have complex psychological explanations.
Yes,
they both had,
they're both such powerful toys, and they throw them out of the cot. It has an impact on the rest of us, right?
It's all really simply explained. Both of them had really shit dads, and in Musk's case, physically, and a violent physical abuser and a heavy drinker, a bit like Donald's old man. Anyway, that's we're going off on tangent, but Trump's important, and he's there in Elbow's speech today, Emma. Mm-hmm. And it's how you tie in Medicare, it's how you tie in some discussion around reindustrialisation and manufacturing. And I've just seen some of the snippets of Elbow's speech. At the start, he's saying, our mission is to stand up for Australia.
Yep.
Now, without mentioning two words, Donald Trump, that's what he's saying. He's counterposing his agenda, what his government is about, and it's the antithesis of Trump. Correct.
There's nuance in that,
yes.
Right? And that is, when he talks about Australia, and I'm not trying to speak here as part of a sort of Elbow fan base here, but it's important because when you see the rhetoric that some within political circles want to build around China, for example, he doesn't want to embark on an aggressive relationship with China for a number of reasons. One, he knows the trauma that causes Chinese Australians, right? And so they are an important constituency for the Labor Party now. Mm-hmm. Two, he knows Western Australians really don't love the idea of losing their main trading partner, and basically, if that happens, then thousands upon thousands of Western Australian jobs go out the window.
Yep.
So when he talks about Australia, there are many aspects to it, and I think for the first time when he pushed back on the Americans' hawkish language around China the last week or so, that was very, very profound.
And it is about as well pointing out that we have a history of doing things slightly differently in Australia. As we were talking about earlier, our cycles have been different. A lot of the social democratic reforms of the post-war era, Curtin and Chifley, coincided with the Attlee government's investments in the UK and FDR's New Deal in America. But since that time, our fortunes have diverged a bit. We had a long period of Conservative government in the 50s and 60s when those countries didn't, and then we had the Australian Labourist approach to neoliberalism in the 1980s. So what Albanese is also saying is we're actually not like them. We're not nearly as divided, not nearly as conflicted about who we are in the world. Culturally, those culture wars don't work as well here as they do in the UK and the US because of those reasons. And also we don't need to import their lessons. And this is something, Nick, you and I have been strong on for a long time. When people a few years ago on the left were talking about about the Green New Deal or the UBI or those very American ideas that we don't need them in this country. We actually have a very good, well-targeted welfare system. We have universal healthcare and other services. We have universal superannuation. We can do things our own way, and we've actually proven to have better outcomes for our people by doing things our own way.
Reminds me, during COVID, I put out a special edition of the Toxic magazine just to debate some of these progressives and Greens. I called it the True Blue Deal, and it sent them into paroxysms of rage. And, I was out there fishing and the salmon jumped on the hook. What you're also getting at, Emma, is this concept of progressive patriotism, which Anthony Albanese has started to elaborate on, and it's really fascinating. You talked about some of those cycles, and I've mentioned this. Cos and I have explained this before. I love it. I don't like the word progressive, but I love the fact that we're talking about patriotism, because when you look at the sort of rhymes of history, it's every 4 decades, Labor and Social Democratic parties have a moment. They've got like 2 to 3 terms where we get elected, and we often get elected at the same time in the UK and Australia. 1910s, Andy Fisher. Andy Fisher owns patriotism. He builds the Australian Navy. Then we have Curtin and Chifley, the 40s. Curtin owns patriotism. Again, a lot of it is due to his wartime leadership. 1980s, Bob Hawke. What does Bob Hawke do? He owns patriotism and redefines what it means in far more inclusive terms, what it means to be Australian. And what are we seeing here now in the middle of the 2020s with Albo and Jim Chalmers and co? I should say, Emma, this is a very Gen X government. We've got 3 Gen Xers in the room, and virtually now apparently, according to The Economist, the loser generation, but we're actually in charge. We've got a boomer prime minister, but Gen X.
We're not loud, but we get on with stuff.
Is running the show. Progressive patriotism, Emma. What does it mean to you? I mean, as I said, I don't like the word progressive. It's the last thing you want to hear when you go to the doctors. But
what does it mean?
What does it mean?
And why is it important?
Why is it important? Do you agree that you've got to take chances in politics? And I think it's a really important. Sometimes you're dealt cards you don't want to be dealt, but Trump was seen as a threat. It's actually an opportunity, and I think that's what Labor did really well at the election, as well as they grabbed it, as Cos says, with nuance.
No, I agree. I think the first thing to understand, so people on the left hear the word patriotism and they hear, it's the refuge of scoundrels. It's seen as a when it's in the right, it's seen as my country, right or wrong, sort of jingoism rather than patriotism. That's a different thing. And there's many on the what I would call the libertarian post-materialist left who are completely suspicious of any mention of patriotism because they only associate it with that jingoistic approach. They're also less likely to be attached to their own country and see themselves as internationalists. The basic point I would make to all those people is you cannot have democracy without the nation state. That democracy rests on people having a stake in their country, having a stake in the direction their country is going to take. We can't vote to determine what's going to go on the other side of the world. So if you want a well-functioning democracy that serves its people, you embrace the nation state and you embrace the idea that this is our country. What makes us in it together? That we're all Australians. We may never meet 95% of other Australians. We may come from different cultural backgrounds, have different religions, have different economic backgrounds, different class backgrounds, but we're in it together. This is our democratic project. You've got to embrace that. You reject that, you go the way of the sort of post-materialist left. You give people nothing to cling on to, nothing to vote for, no feeling of safety, no feeling of being in something. So that's the fundamental basis of it. Beyond that, it's about saying, look, no, it's not about excusing mistakes that the country may have made or defending everything the country does just because it's my country. It's about saying, what are our strengths as a community? In Australia, for example, we have obviously huge natural resources benefits, both in fossil fuels but also in renewable critical minerals and so on. But we also have a very stable democracy. We have a stable economy. We have a very rich multicultural society, which, has been under some pressure in the last couple of years, which is horrible. But historically, we've been much more welcoming of migrants in the post-war period than a lot of other countries. And we've done that collectively. We haven't said, you go and settle over there and form a sort of enclave and fend for yourselves. And we've got a highly educated populace. Now, we have some faults as well, but most of the things that are bad about our country are the result of political choices that can be undone. So the concentration of our economy in, basically digging stuff up, shipping it off overseas, or buying real estate and sitting on it, that's not a good thing. We need to diversify the economy. But we have the ability to do that if we work together to have the conversation. What kind of country do we want to be? And you can hear that in the Prime Minister's speech today and in everything the Treasurer says about, well, it's not just this is what we've got and nothing else is possible. It's about opening up what is possible if we act collectively as a nation, because we're a good country, we've got a good body politic, we've got a great electoral system and a lot of benefits. So being proud of that and seeking to make it better and to include more people in the franchise is what progressive patriotism is about. It's not about saying my country's better than yours or, our culture's the only way to do things. It's about investing in what's good about us.
No, we can over-intellectualise these things. I've said this to Cos before, said to Claire O'Neill. Patriotism is loving your country, and I think Australia's the best country in the world, but a progressive version of patriotism is starting with that, understanding that people are tribal, they're defined by collective identities, but going one step further than conservatives, being a patriot is wanting to make your country better and fairer, and in some of the language I've seen from Albo today at the Press Club, stronger. And what he's doing actually, and Cos, I'd be interested in your thoughts here, taking ownership of the concept of strength, I think, is one of the most fascinating rhetorical developments I've seen for a long time. I've been urging this on Labor, but he's using the word strength. He's wanting to own strength. And I love it. I love it because for a long time we've gone, we're not going to touch strength. That's a conservative thing. No. And it's reimagining what it is to be politically strong. It's having a strong social safety net, investing in things like the urgent care clinics.
So all this stuff is great, but
he's the cold water being poured over us.
You're about to get
It's like yesterday. It's like this is a form of the they had yesterday the footy, people being dunked in ice for a very good cause, motor neurone disease.
The rhetoric's important, and the change of rhetoric is great, and this is all very positive. What they need to then be able to point to at the end of this term is that they've taken some pretty significant steps to reassure the Australians that, are clearly, have got reservations about our system, that being proud of the country you live in is because it has taken care of you. It will take care of people that you care about. Right? That it's got a heart. That it's got all these things as part of it, right? That you're not voiceless, you do matter. If they pull that off, then everything that we've been speaking about works. If they don't, people still feel like they're ignored, then we could be having this conversation all over again in 3 years' time.
No, you're absolutely right. It's about, and that's what the Prime Minister's talking about, building. This is, instead of drill, baby, drill, I think it's build, baby, build for the ALP in this term of government. Building things that people can see, that they can point to concretely, like the urgent care clinics, like the free TAFE, like, the creation of new jobs. I mean, there's a lot of poo-pooing in the financial press around the Future Made in Australia agenda, but people want to see that. Like, one of the big problems with the climate wars over the last 20 years has been a lot of regional Australia's gone, well, okay, yes, you want to shut down fossil fuels, but where's my job going to go? Where's my kid's job going to go? This entire region's built on fossil fuels. It's not about propping up bad industries. It's about saying what's the next obvious step for that region and how do we help both the private sector and the community invest in it. So having those things to point to is going to be really important. And yes, I think there's also a challenge around the narrative of it, the rhetoric, the storytelling, the bringing that together. What does it mean? The the Bernard Keanes of the world, who Nick does not like, who'd say, what's Albo's agenda? What's his big narrative? What's his big goal? Well, if you can't do the work of looking at the policy, which not many journos do anymore, and work that out, then someone's going to have to set it out for you in a nice book or something. Maybe I'll try and do that as part of Chifley.
There isn't enough discussion on this, and the way the media responded to just some of the recent policy announcements, but also they've gone back to like nothing's changed.
Yep.
They've just won 94 seats.
That's right.
Like it's the biggest result in decades.
80 years.
That's right.
But maybe but that's also our fault, because we're paying too much attention to the legacy media cause.
Well, that's what point I'm about to say.
Because we're sad Gen Xers.
Yeah, through our compulsory preferential system, Australians elected Labor.
Yep.
And handed them 94 seats.
Yep.
The 33-something% who voted for the other party, 72% of them are millennial Gen Z.
Yep.
The overwhelming number of them preferenced Labor. Knowingly did. Those of us who count ballots, and I've done that professionally, and we watched closely the count up where I live in Cornwall. People break the ticket. They actually do not follow the how to vote card. They consciously preference who they want to preference.
Yep.
So, for example, in the federal seat of Cornwall, the Greens handed out a how to vote card that preferenced and aided and abetted a right-wing ticket.
Yep.
They were informed about that. It didn't change it.
Despite being the first Palestinian candidate to state,
correct.
All of their rhetoric about Gaza.
I was
That's right.
corrected.
Correct.
I gave congratulations to Bussam the other day. I was corrected.
So
apparently, Joe Hockey's the first Palestinian. It's not quite the same
Joe
thing.
was born here.
Palestinian Christian background as well.
Yeah, but Bassam's a refugee.
Yes.
Right? Big differences here. Both parents are from the Levant. They've gone and preferenced this other independent, and even when representatives from the Arabic community had gone to the Greens and said, you are making a grave error here, they centrally decided to change it but didn't hand out a different how to vote card. Anyway, it should not be a surprise that analysts like Tom at Sky and Anthony Green at the ABC thought that the Greens' preferences would go to the independent before Labor, because that's what normally happens across the board. Nope. They broke the ticket. Yep. They close to 70% jumped over the independent, which is actually very unusual, and went straight for the Labor candidate.
Speaking of Labor candidate, Bussam, we are going to speak to Bussam in coming weeks. I'm really excited to have Bussam in the studio with us. We've got a range of fascinating MPs, premiers, union activists, authors. It's all happening on Curtin's cast, because Emma Dawson, if I didn't say congratulations on the appointment at Chifley, congratulations, Mazel Tov.
Thank you.
In my lingo. Really excited for you and excited to see what you achieve over the next coming years. You'll no doubt have a busy agenda, and we're looking forward to working with you, as we always have.
As am I.
One plug for our Curtinistas. Guys, if you crawl out from underneath those rocks on Saturday, the 5th of July in Sydney, in Piermont, John Curtin Research Centre is absolutely thrilled to be hosting the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, who will be delivering the 2025 Curtin Oration. This is taking place on the 80th anniversary, to the day, the 80th anniversary of the passing of the great man, the greatest Prime Minister Australia has ever experienced, John Curtin. He passed away on the 5th of July 1945, and we're marking that with a special Curtin Oration dinner in Sydney. Head to curtinrc.org, head to our Facebook, Instagram pages, head to TikTok. I'm there. TikTok, with monitoring Coz's emergence as a social influencer, TikTok superstar. I'm going to send Coz an invoice. I'm going to send Coz an invoice soon too for that honour. Get your tickets, buy your tables, because this is going to sell out in the next week. But for now, we are out of time. Thank you, Emma Dawson.
Thanks,
Thank you, Kung Fu Cos Samaras. We'll see you next week, Curtinistas. Ciao and arrivederci.